At Father's Day dinner with my daughter, I received a message from an unknown number. Don't eat anything. Stay alive. I was shocked and left the table without saying a word. As I walked out, 5 police officers stormed in through the door and handcuffed her. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. The fork trembled in my hand as I read the message for the 3rd time. Don't eat anything. Stay alive. The words blurred on my phone screen, sent from a number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I glanced across the table at Everly, my daughter, who was chatting cheerfully about her new job at the marketing firm. "Dad, you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" Everly's voice carried that familiar note of concern that had become so common over the past year. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers touching my forehead. "You've been having those dizzy spells again, haven't you?" I wanted to tell her about the message, but something stopped me. Instead, I pushed my plate of beef stroganoff away, the rich aroma that had seemed so appetizing moments before, now making my stomach churn. "I'm just not very hungry tonight, sweetheart." Everly frowned, her green eyes narrowing slightly. "But I made this especially for Father's Day. You always loved my stroganoff." She paused, then added with a gentle laugh, "Remember how you used to say it was even better than Mom's?" The mention of Sarah, my late wife, sent a familiar pang through my chest. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, and Everly had stepped in to fill that void, cooking for me, visiting twice a week, making sure I took my medications. She'd been my angel during the darkest period of my life. "I know, honey. It's delicious, really. I started to explain when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the same unknown number. My hand shook as I declined it. "Who keeps calling you?" Everly asked, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. "Probably a telemarketer," I mumbled, but my voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. The phone buzzed once more with another text. "Get out now! Police coming!" Terror shot through me like ice water. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I need some air." "Dad, what's wrong? You're scaring me." Everly set down her fork and started to rise, but I was already moving toward the front door. That's when I heard them. Heavy footsteps on my front porch, the crackle of radio static, low voices coordinating something. My blood turned to ice as I realized what was happening. The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. 5 police officers in tactical gear stormed through, their weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed off the walls of my quiet suburban home. "Police, nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" I stumbled backward, my hands automatically rising above my head. Behind me, I heard Everly scream, a high-pitched sound of genuine terror that cut through the chaos. "Benjamin Crawford, step away from the table." The lead officer, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, kept her weapon trained on the dining room while 2 other officers moved toward Everly. "What's happening? Why are you in my house?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. This had to be some kind of mistake, some horrible misunderstanding. "Everly Crawford, you're under arrest for attempted murder." The words hit me like a physical blow. I watched in stunned disbelief as they pulled my daughter's hands behind her back, the metallic click of handcuffs impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "Attempted murder?" I whispered, the words foreign on my tongue. There must be some mistake. "This is my daughter. We were just having dinner." Everly's face had gone completely white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Dad, I don't know what's happening." "Tell them this is crazy." The lead officer approached me, her expression grim but not unkind. "Mr. Crawford, we have reason to believe your daughter has been systematically poisoning you over the past 18 months. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Poisoning? My Everly? The daughter who had nursed me through pneumonia last winter, who brought me homemade soup when I was sick, who never missed a birthday or holiday?" "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, fragments of memory began surfacing. The constant stomach problems that had started after Sarah's death. The mysterious dizzy spells that doctors couldn't explain. The way I always felt worse after Everly's visits, something I'd attributed to loneliness when she left. "We found arsenic in your blood work, Mr. Crawford. Levels consistent with chronic poisoning." The officer's voice was professional, matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather instead of destroying my entire world. Arsenic. The word echoed in my head as I stared at my daughter, who was now sobbing hysterically as they read her rights. My beautiful, caring daughter who had been slowly killing me. The anonymous tip came in this morning, the officer continued. Someone who knew about the poisoning and couldn't stand by and watch anymore. I looked at the table, at the plate of stroganoff I'd been about to eat, at the glass of wine Everly had poured for me with such loving care. How many times had she served me death disguised as devotion? As they led Everly toward the door, she turned back to me, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Daddy, please, you have to believe me. I would never hurt you. I love you." But something in her eyes had changed. Behind the tears and the protests, I saw something cold and calculating that I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed, and I'd simply chosen to ignore it because I couldn't bear to lose the only family I had left. The house fell silent after they left, leaving me alone with the ruins of my dinner and the wreckage of my life. I sank into my chair, staring at the food that could have been my last meal, wondering how long I had been living with a killer. The hospital bed felt cold against my back as Detective Maria Santos pulled up a chair beside me. 3 days had passed since Everly's arrest. 3 days of medical tests and questions I couldn't answer. The doctors had pumped my stomach, run blood work, started me on chelation therapy to remove the arsenic from my system. "I need you to think back, Mr. Crawford," Detective Santos said gently, opening a thick manila folder. "When did you first start feeling sick?" I closed my eyes, trying to organize the blur of memories that had been haunting me since that horrible night. It was about 6 months after Sarah died. Maybe a little longer. My voice was hoarse from the tube they'd put down my throat. I started having stomach problems, nausea, cramping. The doctors said it was grief-related. "And Everly was helping take care of you during this time?" The question felt like a knife twist. She was wonderful. After Sarah passed, Everly moved back from Seattle to be closer to me. She said she couldn't bear the thought of me being alone. I laughed bitterly. I thought I was the luckiest father in the world. Detective Santos made a note in her pad. "Tell me about your routine with her. When did she visit? What did she do when she came over?" I stared at the ceiling tiles, remembering. Tuesday evenings and Sunday afternoons, like clockwork, she'd bring groceries, cook dinner, sometimes stay overnight if I was feeling particularly unwell. The irony wasn't lost on me now. She always insisted on cooking. Said restaurant food wasn't good for someone my age. Did she have access to your medications? Of course. She organized my pill dispenser every week. Sarah used to do that. And after she died, I could never keep track of what to take when. My hands clenched the hospital sheets. Everly said it was just another way she could take care of her old dad. The detective's pen scratched against paper. "We found evidence that she was grinding up arsenic tablets and mixing them into your medications. Small doses, just enough to make you sick, but not enough to kill you quickly." The methodical nature of it made my skin crawl. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was calculated, patient, deliberate. But why? Why would she want to hurt me? Detective Santos hesitated before pulling out a document from her folder. "We found this in her apartment, Mr. Crawford. It's a copy of your will from 2 years ago." I recognized my lawyer's letterhead immediately. The will that left everything to Everly, written during those dark months after Sarah's diagnosis, when I couldn't imagine living without my wife. "There's something else," the detective continued. "We also found a more recent will in your home office, one that significantly changes your beneficiaries." My heart sank as I remembered. The new will. I wrote it 8 months ago. I'd been feeling stronger then, more like myself. The grief counselor had helped me realize that I needed to think about legacy, about making a difference. I left the bulk of my estate to the animal shelter where Sarah used to volunteer. Everly would still get the house and some money, but not the $2 million in investments and life insurance, Detective Santos finished. "According to the new will, that all goes to charity. $2 million, enough to kill for, apparently." But how did she find out? I never told her about the changes. "We're still investigating, but it appears she'd been going through your papers during her visits. We found copies of bank statements and investment reports hidden in her apartment." I felt sick again, But this time it wasn't from the poison. It was from the realization that my daughter had been methodically searching through my personal documents, planning my death, while pretending to care for me. "There's more, Mr. Crawford." Detective Santos's voice grew even more gentle. "We believe she was also researching symptoms that would mimic natural illness in elderly patients. We found searches on her computer for things like signs of dementia in older men and natural causes of death in seniors." The room started spinning again. "She was going to make it look like I died naturally?" "The medical examiner believes that if she'd continued with the current dosage, you would have appeared to die from organ failure within another 6 months. Given your age and your history of health problems since your wife's death, it's unlikely anyone would have ordered an autopsy." I thought about all those doctor's visits, all those tests that came back inconclusive, the specialists who scratched their heads over my mysterious symptoms, the well-meaning friends who told me it was just old age catching up with me. "Last month," I said suddenly, "I was in the hospital for 4 days with what they thought was food poisoning." Everly barely left my side. "She brought me homemade soup from home." Detective Santos made another note. "That coincides with a spike in arsenic levels we found in your hair samples. Hair grows slowly, so it's like a timeline of the poisoning." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. Every act of kindness, every worried phone call, every home-cooked meal had been part of an elaborate murder plot. My daughter hadn't been taking care of me. She'd been killing me one spoonful at a time. "The night before she was arrested," I said slowly, "she brought me a special dinner for Father's Day. She said she wanted to celebrate how strong I'd been since Mom died." I looked at Detective Santos. That was going to be the final dose, wasn't it? The detective nodded grimly. "The amount of arsenic in that stroganoff would have likely caused organ failure within hours. If you'd eaten that meal, you wouldn't have lived to see morning." I closed my eyes, trying to process the enormity of what had almost happened. Someone had saved my life with that anonymous message, someone who knew what Everly was planning and couldn't let it happen. "Who sent the warning?" I asked. "Who saved me?" Detective Santos smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "That's something we're still working on. But whoever it was, they've been watching the situation for some time. The tip included details about the poisoning method, and even suggested where we might find evidence in Everly's apartment. So someone else knew what she was doing. It appears so, and when they realized she was going to escalate to a fatal dose, they decided to act. I stared out the hospital window at the parking lot below, watching families come and visit their sick relatives. Real families, with real love and concern. Not like the twisted performance I'd been living with for over a year. The worst part wasn't even that Everly had tried to kill me. It was that she'd made me doubt my own instincts, my own perceptions. Every time I'd felt worse after her visits, every time something seemed off about her behavior, I dismissed it as grief and loneliness playing tricks on my mind. But somewhere out there was someone who had seen the truth and had risked everything to save me. The law office felt smaller than I remembered as I sat across from my attorney, Robert Fleming, who had been handling my affairs for over 20 years. He spread the documents across his mahogany desk like a surgeon laying out instruments, his face grave behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Benjamin, I have to ask you something difficult," Robert said, adjusting his tie nervously. "When you came to me 8 months ago to change your will, did you tell anyone about the modifications?" I shook my head slowly. "No one. You advised me to keep it private until I was ready to discuss it with Everly." My voice caught on her name. "Even after everything," saying it still felt like swallowing glass. Robert pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "The police found these in Everly's apartment. They're photocopies of bank statements, investment portfolios, and insurance documents, some dating back 2 years. My hands trembled as I recognized my own financial records, documents I kept locked in my home office filing cabinet. "How did she get these?" "We believe she was systematically copying your paperwork during her visits. Look at this." He showed me a highlighted copy of my investment summary. $1.8 million in various accounts, plus the $500,000 life insurance policy. The numbers stared back at me, but they felt meaningless now. I worked 40 years to build that nest egg. Sarah and I lived modestly, saved every penny we could. There's more. Robert's voice grew heavier. We found evidence that Everly had been forging your signature on financial documents. She attempted to change the beneficiary on your life insurance policy back to herself just 3 weeks ago. My blood ran cold. 3 weeks ago. But the policy clearly states that any beneficiary changes require my presence at the insurance office. She knew that. According to the insurance investigator, she called claiming you were too ill to come in person and asked about alternative procedures. When they insisted on following protocol, she became increasingly agitated. I remembered that week clearly now. Everly had been different, more attentive than usual. She'd insisted on staying overnight for 4 consecutive days, claiming she was worried about my deteriorating condition. She was getting desperate, I realized aloud. The new will, the insurance policy, she was running out of time to secure the money. Robert nodded grimly. The police also found internet searches on her computer. She'd been researching elderly mental competency laws, trying to find ways to have you declared mentally unfit. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. She wanted to have me committed. It appears so. If she could prove you were suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, she could have the new will invalidated and gain power of attorney over your assets. Robert removed his glasses and cleaned them methodically. Benjamin, I've seen family greed before, but this level of calculation is extraordinary. I thought about all those conversations where Everly had gently suggested I was becoming forgetful, how she'd started speaking to me more slowly, repeating herself as if I couldn't understand simple concepts, how she'd begun making doctor's appointments for me without my knowledge, claiming I'd forgotten about them. She was gaslighting me, I said, the psychology term feeling foreign in my mouth, making me doubt my own mental clarity. The medical records support that theory. Dr. Patterson told police that Everly had called him multiple times expressing concern about your cognitive decline. She claimed you were confused, forgetting conversations, showing signs of dementia. Dr. Patterson had been my physician for 15 years, a good man who'd known both Sarah and me well. But I never had those symptoms when I wasn't being poisoned. Exactly. The arsenic poisoning was causing confusion, memory problems, and disorientation. Symptoms that could easily be mistaken for early-stage dementia, especially if someone was coaching the doctor to look for them. Robert pulled out another document, this one bearing official letterhead. 3 weeks before her arrest, Everly had scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist who specializes in elderly competency evaluations. She told his office that her father was becoming increasingly paranoid and might need to be evaluated for his own safety. The systematic nature of her plan was breathtaking in its cruelty. She hadn't just wanted to kill me, she'd wanted to destroy my dignity first, to have me declared mentally incompetent so no one would question her control over my affairs. There's something else you need to know, Robert continued, his voice dropping. We found a draft letter on her computer, apparently intended for the probate court. In it, she claims that you'd been showing signs of dementia for over a year, and that the new will was the product of a confused mind influenced by overzealous charity solicitors. I felt nauseated. She was going to challenge the will even after I died. It appears she had every angle covered. Slow poisoning that would mimic natural illness, documentation of supposed mental decline, and a legal strategy to overturn any will that didn't benefit her. Robert leaned back in his chair. If that anonymous tip hadn't come in when it did, she might have succeeded. The thought of Everly standing at my funeral, playing the role of the grieving daughter while secretly celebrating her inheritance, made my stomach turn. How long had she been planning this? Had she started plotting before Sarah was even gone? Robert, I need to ask you something. I met his eyes. In your professional opinion, how long do you think she was planning this? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers spread before him. Based on when she started copying your documents and the internet search history the police provided, I'd say at least 18 months, possibly longer. 18 months. That meant she'd started planning my murder while Sarah was still alive, while we were still a happy family celebrating birthdays and holidays together. The daughter who'd held my hand at Sarah's funeral had already been calculating how much my death would be worth. The most chilling part, Robert continued, is how patient she was. Most people who commit crimes for money act impulsively, make mistakes. But Everly was methodical. She researched, she planned, she executed each step carefully. I thought about all the meals she'd prepared, all the medications she'd organized, all the concerned phone calls, checking on my health. Each interaction had been a performance, every act of love a step closer to my grave. What happens now? I asked, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. The district attorney is building a strong case. Attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, forgery. She's looking at 25 years to life. Robert gathered the papers into neat stacks. As for your estate, the new will remains valid. Your wishes will be honored. 25 years to life. The daughter I'd raised, the child I'd read bedtime stories to and taught to ride a bicycle, would spend the rest of her life in prison. Part of me felt relief that justice would be served, but a larger part felt only emptiness, a hollow ache where my love for her used to live. There's one more thing, Robert said, hesitating. The police want to know if you'd like to write a victim impact statement for her sentencing hearing. A victim impact statement. What could I possibly say that would capture the magnitude of this betrayal? How do you explain to a judge that your own child had not only tried to kill you, but had systematically destroyed your trust, your peace of mind, your very sense of reality? I'll think about it, I said, though I already knew the answer. Some wounds are too deep for words, some betrayals too complete for explanation. As I left Robert's office, I realized that Everly hadn't just tried to steal my money. She'd stolen something far more valuable, my ability to trust, to love without reservation, to believe in the fundamental goodness of family bonds. But somewhere out there was the person who had saved my life, someone who had cared enough to risk everything to protect me. In a world where my own daughter had tried to destroy me, there was still hope that not all human connections were poisoned. The county jail visiting room smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat at the metal table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, waiting for them to bring Everly in. Detective Santos had strongly advised against this visit, but I needed to look my daughter in the eye one more time. I needed to understand how the child I'd raised had become capable of such calculated evil. When the door opened, I barely recognized the woman they escorted in. Gone was the polished, professional appearance I'd grown accustomed to. Everly's hair hung limp and unwashed, her orange jumpsuit wrinkled, her face pale and drawn. But it was her eyes that shocked me most, cold, empty, devoid of the warmth I'd once believed was genuine. She sat across from me without a word, her handcuffed wrists resting on the table between us. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other across a chasm that felt unbridgeable. "Hello, Daddy." Her voice was flat, emotionless. No tears, no protests of innocence, no pleas for forgiveness. "Everly," I could barely get her name out. "I came here hoping you might explain why you tried to kill me." She leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You really want to know?" "Yes, because you were supposed to be dead already." The casual cruelty in her voice made my blood freeze. "Do you have any idea how frustrating it's been, watching you hang on week after week? I had everything planned perfectly." The clinical detachment in her voice was more terrifying than any emotional outburst would have been. This wasn't my daughter speaking. This was a stranger wearing her face. "Planned for how long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Since Mom got sick." Everly examined her fingernails as if discussing the weather. When the doctors told us she had maybe 6 months to live, I started thinking about what would happen after. You were so lost without her, so dependent. It would have been easy to make it look like grief just overcame you. My heart hammered against my ribs. "You started planning my murder while your mother was dying?" "I started planning my future," she corrected. "You and Mom lived like paupers, saving every penny for a retirement you'd never get to enjoy. All that money just sitting there while I struggled to make ends meet in Seattle. I thought about all the times I'd offered to help her financially, all the times she'd proudly declined, insisting she wanted to make her own way in the world. You never told me you were struggling. Because I knew you'd want to help, and I didn't want your help. I wanted your money, all of it. Her eyes glittered with a cold light. Do you know how much it costs to live in Seattle? How much my apartment rent was? How much I was spending just to maintain appearances? So you moved back here to kill me. I moved back here to be your devoted daughter, to take care of you in your grief until your broken heart just stopped beating. She shrugged. The arsenic was just insurance, something to speed up the natural course of events. The matter-of-fact way she discussed my planned murder made my skin crawl. But there was something else, something in her tone that suggested this wasn't just about money. There's more, isn't there? I said quietly. This wasn't just about the inheritance. For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Anger. You really want to know what this is about? It's about spending my entire childhood competing with charity cases. What are you talking about? The animal shelter, Dad? Do you know how many times you and Mom canceled plans with me because some dog needed surgery? How many birthdays were interrupted because a cat needed to be bottle-fed? Her voice rose slightly. You paid for veterinary care for strays, but made me work summers to pay for my own car. I stared at her in disbelief. We taught you compassion, Everly. We showed you how to care about creatures that couldn't care for themselves. You showed me that I came second to anything with 4 legs and a sob story, her hands clenched into fists. And then that new will, leaving everything to the animal shelter while your own daughter gets table scraps. It was like a final insult. The depth of her resentment was staggering. All those years when I'd thought we were raising her to be caring and empathetic, she'd been harboring this festering jealousy. But you had help, I said, remembering what Detective Santos had told me. You didn't do this alone. Everly's expression shifted, became cautious. I don't know what you mean. The police found evidence that someone was helping you, someone with medical knowledge who knew how to obtain arsenic, how to administer it in doses that wouldn't be immediately detected. You're fishing. His name is Marcus Chen. I watched her face carefully as I spoke the name Detective Santos had shared with me just that morning. Your boyfriend, the pharmacy technician? Everly's mask slipped completely. Her face flushed red, then went pale. How did you find out about Marcus? The police traced the arsenic to a batch stolen from the hospital pharmacy where he works. They have security footage of him accessing the chemical storage room on multiple occasions when he wasn't scheduled to be there. He was quiet for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. Marcus thought he was so clever. He said no one would ever trace it back to us if we were careful. How long have you been with him? 2 years. We met online. Her voice softened slightly. He understood me, understood what it was like to feel trapped by family obligations. His parents expected him to support them financially while he could barely afford his own rent. I felt sick. So you planned this together? Marcus suggested the arsenic. He said it was almost impossible to detect unless doctors knew specifically to look for it. We researched the symptoms, the dosage, everything. She looked up at me with something that might have been pride. We planned to get married after you died, use the inheritance to start fresh somewhere else. The calculated nature of their plan was breathtaking. 2 people who'd found each other through shared greed and resentment, bonding over the fantasy of murdering their own family members for money. He was supposed to propose after the funeral, Everly continued, lost in her fantasy. We had it all worked out. I'd play the grieving daughter for a few months, then gradually start dating him publicly. A whirlwind romance born from mutual comfort and understanding. And now? Now Marcus is in the cell next to mine. The bitterness in her voice was absolute. He threw me under the bus the second they arrested him, claimed I seduced him into helping me, that it was all my idea. Even among thieves and murderers, there was no honor. The man she'd trusted with her deepest secrets had betrayed her just as thoroughly as she'd betrayed me. The police told me something else, I said quietly. They said Marcus has been feeding information to someone on the outside, someone who's been watching both of you. Everly's eyes widened. What kind of information? Details about the poisoning schedule, when you were planning to administer the final dose. That's how someone knew to warn me that night. That's impossible. Marcus wouldn't... She trailed off, realization dawning on her face. Unless he was trying to save himself? Maybe he got cold feet and decided to sabotage the whole thing. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe it. Someone else had been involved, someone who'd been watching their plan unfold and had ultimately decided to save my life rather than let it proceed. Whoever it was, I said, standing to leave, they cared more about my well-being than my own daughter did. Everly looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of the little girl she'd once been. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I hope it was worth it, Dad, choosing animals over your own child. As the guard led her away, I realized that this would be the last time I'd ever see her. The daughter I'd loved was gone, had maybe never existed at all. What remained was a stranger who happened to share my DNA and my name, but none of my values or love. But someone out there had values. Someone had cared enough to save me when my own flesh and blood had failed. Now I needed to find out who. The coffee shop on Maple Street buzzed with the usual afternoon crowd, but I sat alone at a corner table, stirring my cup absently while watching the door. Detective Santos had called that morning with news that would change everything I thought I knew about my rescue. "Mr. Crawford?" A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman in her early 60s approaching my table. She was petite, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. "I'm Benjamin," I said, standing and extending my hand. "I'm Janet Walsh." Her handshake was firm, but her voice trembled slightly. "I believe Detective Santos told you I wanted to meet Janet Walsh." The name Detective Santos had given me belonged to the woman who had sent the anonymous warning that saved my life. I gestured for her to sit, my mind racing with questions. "You're the one who warned me," I said simply. She nodded, settling into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure I should reveal myself, but after everything that's happened, I felt you deserved to know who saved you and why." I studied her face, still trying to place where I might have known her from. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with the handle of her purse, glancing around the coffee shop as if making sure we weren't overheard. "How did you know what Everly was doing?" I asked. Janet took a deep breath before answering. "Because I was married to a man just like her, someone who pretended to love me while slowly killing me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You were being poisoned too?" "For 3 years." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "My late husband Richard used antifreeze in my food. Ethylene glycol poisoning mimics so many other conditions that doctors kept misdiagnosing me. Kidney problems, neurological issues, chronic fatigue. I was dying by degrees, and no one could figure out why." I leaned forward, horrified. "How did you find out?" "Our neighbor's cat got into Richard's garage and died after drinking from a puddle of what we thought was water. When the vet did a necropsy, they found antifreeze poisoning." Janet's hand shook slightly as she reached for her coffee. I started putting pieces together. How I only got sick when Richard cooked for me. How he always insisted on bringing me drinks when I was bedridden. How he'd started researching my life insurance policy and asking about my will. The parallel to my own situation was chilling. "What did you do?" I pretended not to know while I gathered evidence. I started saving samples of food he prepared, documented my symptoms, even recorded conversations where he talked about my declining health with family members. Janet's voice hardened. "It took me 6 months to build a case strong enough for the police to take seriously." "And Richard?" "Died in prison 2 years into his sentence. Heart attack." He said it matter-of-factly, without emotion. I felt nothing when they called to tell me. That's what these people do to us, Benjamin. They don't just poison our bodies, they poison our ability to love, to trust, to feel. I understood exactly what she meant. The numbness I'd felt since Everly's arrest, the way emotions seemed muted and distant. "But how did you know about my situation? How did you know Everly?" Janet hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. "After Richard's death, I became obsessed with preventing what happened to me from happening to others. I started volunteering at the senior center, joining community groups, paying attention to patterns that might indicate elder abuse." She opened the notebook, revealing pages of handwritten notes. Names, dates, observations. I keep track of families in our community where something seems off. Adult children who are overly involved in their parents' medical care, sudden health declines in previously healthy seniors, financial irregularities. Yeah, you were watching my family. I noticed Everly about 8 months ago at the pharmacy. She was asking very specific questions about your medications, claiming she needed to understand them better to help care for you. Janet flipped through her notes. The pharmacist mentioned to me later that she'd seemed unusually interested in potential drug interactions and side effects. My skin crawled. She was researching how to make the poisoning look natural. That's what I suspected, so I started paying closer attention. I volunteered to help with the Meals on Wheels program that serves your neighborhood, and I began watching your house during Everly's visits. The thought of this stranger observing my family's interactions felt invasive, but I was grateful beyond words that she had. What did you see? Patterns. You were always visibly healthier on the days between her visits. I watched you work in your garden, walk to the mailbox with energy and purpose. But within hours of Everly leaving, you'd become lethargic, unsteady. Sometimes I'd see you stumble or have to sit down suddenly while doing yard work. I remembered those episodes clearly now. The sudden dizzy spells that would hit me like a truck, the way my legs would give out without warning. I'd attributed it to aging, to grief, to anything except the truth. The final piece of evidence came 3 weeks ago, Janet continued. I was picking up my own prescription when I overheard Everly on the phone with someone. She was discussing something about the final dose and making sure it looked natural. You heard her planning my murder. I heard enough to know that whatever she'd been doing was about to escalate. Janet's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't let another person die the way I almost did. I couldn't stand by and watch another family be destroyed by someone who was supposed to love them. The courage it must have taken to intervene, to risk getting involved in something so dangerous, overwhelmed me. Why didn't you go to the police sooner? Because I knew they'd need concrete evidence, and I didn't have enough. Suspicions and observations aren't enough to arrest someone for attempted murder. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. But when I realized she was planning something for Father's Day, I knew I had to act, even if it meant exposing myself. The anonymous tip. I called the police that morning and told them everything I'd observed. I also called Marcus's supervisor at the pharmacy and reported my suspicions about drug theft. Janet looked directly into my eyes. I knew that once I made those calls, there would be no going back. If I was wrong, I'd look like a paranoid old woman. If I was right, you'd save my life. I hoped so. When I sent you that text message, I wasn't even sure you'd take it seriously. For all I knew, you might have thought it was a prank or a wrong number. I reached across the table and took her hand. You saved me, Janet, not just from death, but from a horrible, prolonged suffering, from dying while believing my daughter loved me. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth about Everly. I know how much that must hurt. The pain was still there, a constant ache in my chest, but it was bearable now because I knew it was honest pain, not the confused agony of being slowly poisoned while believing myself loved. There's something else you should know, Janet said quietly. Marcus has been talking to the police. He's trying to cut a deal by providing information about other potential victims. My blood ran cold. Other victims? Apparently he and Everly weren't the only couple planning this kind of scheme. They were part of an online community that shared information about undetectable poisons, discussed insurance fraud, even traded tips about how to manipulate elderly relatives. The scope of what Janet was describing made me feel sick. How many people? The police aren't saying, but Marcus claims there are at least a dozen other cases being investigated across 3 states. Janet's voice grew grim. People who thought they were dying of natural causes, but were actually being murdered by their own family members. I thought about all the obituaries I'd read over the years, all the sudden declines in health that had seemed so tragic but unremarkable. How many of those deaths had actually been murders disguised as natural causes? The police want me to testify, Janet continued, to explain how I identified the pattern, what I observed, why I decided to intervene. They think my testimony could help convict not just Everly and Marcus, but potentially save other victims. Will you do it? Yes? Her answer came without hesitation. Richard robbed me of 3 years of my life and nearly succeeded in taking everything, but his actions also taught me to recognize the signs, to spot the patterns that others might miss. She smiled sadly. Maybe some good can come from all that suffering. As we sat in the coffee shop surrounded by the normal sounds of everyday life, I realized that Janet had given me more than just a warning text message. She'd given me back my sanity, my sense of reality, my ability to trust my own perceptions. "What will you do now?" she asked. I thought about that question, about the empty house waiting for me, about the future I'd never planned for, because I'd expected to be dead. I don't know yet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, has been turned upside down. "It gets easier," Janet said gently. "The grief for the person you thought they were, the anger at being betrayed, the fear that you'll never be able to trust anyone again, it all gets easier with time." Looking at this remarkable woman who had survived her own nightmare and then dedicated herself to preventing others from suffering the same fate, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. 1 year later, I stood in the warm afternoon sunlight outside the Riverside County Animal Shelter, watching Janet help an elderly golden retriever named Rusty take his first tentative steps after hip surgery. The dog's tail wagged slowly as she knelt beside him, her voice soft and encouraging. "That's it, beautiful boy, one step at a time." I smiled, adjusting the volunteer badge pinned to my shirt. Who would have thought that the woman who saved my life would also become my closest friend, my partner in this new chapter I'd never planned to write? The shelter had been Sarah's passion project for 15 years before her death. She'd volunteered here every Tuesday and Saturday, helping with everything from feeding and grooming to fundraising and adoption events. After she died, I'd avoided coming here because the memories were too painful. Now I understood why she'd loved it so much. "Benjamin, can you help me with the new arrivals?" called Maria Santos. Not Detective Santos anymore, but Maria, the former police officer who'd left the force 6 months ago to become the shelter's operations manager. It turned out that solving my case had awakened something in her, a desire to help victims in a different way. Of course, I set down the bag of dog food I'd been carrying and followed her to the intake area. 3 puppies, barely 8 weeks old, huddled together in a transport carrier. They'd been found abandoned by the highway, hungry and frightened, but miraculously healthy. "They'll need bottle feeding every 4 hours for the next week," Maria explained, lifting the smallest one gently. "Think you're up for some sleepless nights?" I took the tiny puppy in my hands, feeling its rapid heartbeat against my palm. I've got nothing but time. That was true in more ways than one. After Everly's conviction and sentencing to 25 years in prison, I'd sold the house where she'd tried to kill me. Too many memories haunted those rooms, too many meals shared at the table where she'd served me poison. I'd bought a smaller place just 3 miles from the shelter, close enough to walk when the weather was nice. The financial settlement from Everly's insurance fraud had been donated to the shelter, along with the inheritance she'd tried so hard to steal. The irony wasn't lost on me that her greed had ultimately provided more funding for the animals she'd always resented than I could have given them on my own. "How are the night feedings going with the last litter?" Janet asked, joining us with Rusty walking slowly but steadily beside her. "Better than expected? I think I'm getting the hang of this grandpa thing." That's what the other volunteers had started calling me, Grandpa Ben, the man who specialized in caring for the animals that needed extra attention. The seniors with medical issues, the traumatized rescues who needed patience and gentle handling, the abandoned babies who required round-the-clock care. "Speaking of which," Maria said with a grin, "we got a call about a situation that might be perfect for you. A 90-year-old woman in assisted living had to surrender her 15-year-old cat because pets aren't allowed in her new facility. The cat, Oliver, is apparently grieving badly, won't eat, hides all day, cries constantly." I understood exactly how Oliver felt. "What do you need me to do?" "Foster him for a few weeks while we work on finding him a new home. He needs someone patient, someone who understands grief, An hour later, I was sitting in my living room with a large gray tabby cat hiding under my coffee table. Oliver had been beautiful once, but grief had taken its toll. His fur was dull, his eyes listless, his body too thin despite being offered every treat and delicacy the shelter could provide. "I know, buddy," I said softly, settling into my armchair. "It's hard when the person you love most just disappears from your life." I didn't try to coax him out or force interaction. I'd learned that healing couldn't be rushed, that trust had to be earned slowly and carefully. Instead, I opened a book and began reading aloud, letting him get used to the sound of my voice. After about an hour, I felt a gentle pressure against my leg. Oliver had crept out from his hiding place and was leaning against my ankle, purring so quietly I almost missed it. "There you are," I murmured, reaching down slowly to stroke his head. "We're going to be okay, you and me." As the weeks passed, Oliver began to heal. His appetite returned first, then his curiosity about his surroundings. Eventually, he started following me around the house, sleeping on my bed and greeting me at the door when I came home from the shelter. But the most remarkable change was in me. Caring for Oliver, watching him rediscover trust and joy, helped me understand that my capacity for love hadn't been destroyed by Everly's betrayal. It had just been wounded, and like all wounds, it could heal, given time and the right conditions. "I don't think Oliver is going anywhere," Janet observed one evening as we sat on my back porch, watching the cat chase fireflies in the garden. "He's found his person." She was right. Somewhere along the way, fostering had turned into adoption. Oliver and I had both found something we needed in each other, a second chance at family. This time based on genuine affection rather than blood obligation. "Have you heard anything about the other cases?" I asked. The investigation Janet had helped trigger had indeed uncovered a nationwide network of family members poisoning elderly relatives. The final count was staggering: 17 confirmed victims across 6 states, with 3 more cases still under investigation. Maria told me this afternoon that they convicted the last of the conspirators, a woman in Oregon who'd been poisoning her mother-in-law for 2 years. Janet's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. "She'll serve 15 to 20 years. And the survivors? Most are doing well. There's a support group now, people who've been through what we experienced. Would you be interested in joining?" I considered it. For months, I'd avoided talking about what happened, had tried to process the betrayal and trauma on my own, but maybe there was value in connecting with others who understood the particular horror of being betrayed by family. "Maybe," I said. "I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday." Janet nodded. She understood better than anyone that healing happened on its own timeline. As the sun set behind the trees, I felt Oliver jump onto my lap, settling in for his evening nap. His purr was strong and steady now, the sound of contentment rather than comfort-seeking. He'd found his way back to happiness, and in helping him do so, I'd found my own path forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Emergency intake. 3 senior dogs from a hoarding situation. Need experienced fosters ASAP. You available?" I looked at Janet, who was already reaching for her car keys with a smile. "Looks like our evening just got more interesting." "Always," she replied. "But that's what makes it worthwhile." As we drove toward the shelter, Oliver secured in his carrier on the back seat, I realized that this was what happiness looked like for me now. Not the family I'd thought I had, but the community I'd chosen. Not the daughter who'd pretended to love me while planning my death, but the friend who'd risked everything to save me. Not the comfortable retirement I'd planned, but this messy, demanding, deeply rewarding work of healing broken creatures, including myself. Everly had tried to steal my future, but she'd failed in the most fundamental way. She'd taken my money, my trust, my sense of safety, but she couldn't take my capacity to build something meaningful from the wreckage she'd left behind. The 3 dogs we brought home that night were in rough shape, matted fur, overgrown nails, fearful of human contact. But as I settled them into temporary beds in my spare room, I saw something in their eyes that I recognized, the flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how badly we've been hurt. We'll take good care of you, I promised them, for as long as you need. It was the same promise I'd learned to make to myself, one day at a time. Some promises are worth keeping, even when the people who should have kept them for us failed, especially then. Outside, the night was peaceful and full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new animals to care for, new friends to make, new ways to transform pain into purpose. Everly had tried to write the ending to my story, but she'd forgotten something important. The best stories are the ones we write ourselves, especially the second chapters that nobody saw coming. I was 66 years old, and my life was just beginning.